"Get out. This house is mine now." That's what my son Chad said to me. Not with tears, not with hesitation, but with the finality of someone slamming a coffin lid shut. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen, the same one where I used to make his school lunches. My old apron still hung on the back of the pantry door. The clock on the wall, the one he made for me in 2nd grade, ticked like a countdown, and I felt the air vanish from my lungs. He didn't yell. That would have been easier. No, Chad said it the way someone says they're done waiting, done pretending. I had become a stain on his new shining life, and that $65 million check in his pocket had erased everything I had ever done for him. It wasn't just him. His wife, Tara, stood behind him like a shadow with red lips and arms crossed. She didn't say a word. She never needed to. Her smile always carried the venom. Her silence now, it told me everything. This was her idea. I still had the house key in my hand, the key I had used for 32 years. My fingers trembled, but I said nothing. There was a lump in my throat that no words could pass through. Just memories. Just pain. If you've ever been disrespected by someone you love, this story will speak to your heart. The night I left my house, or what used to be mine, I didn't pack much. Just a small bag, my Bible, and the envelope with my late husband's last letter. Everything else I left behind. Even my mother's porcelain angel that always sat on the fireplace. I couldn't bear to look it in the eyes. I spent that first night at the motel off Route 12. The kind of place where the light outside buzzes all night and the curtains don't quite close. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching my sweater, watching the silence. That house was more than walls. It held my youth. My kitchen smelled like cinnamon on cold mornings. The back porch still had the little scratch where Chad fell and bled, and I kissed it better. Every mark in that house was a love story in disguise, and now it was his. Chad hadn't always been like this. No, he used to run into my arms after school, his backpack slipping off his shoulders, yelling, "Mom, guess what?" But money changes people, or maybe it just shows who they really are when they stop needing you. I looked down at my lap. The apron strings were still wrapped around my fingers from when I grabbed it in a daze before leaving. I don't know why I took it. Maybe because it still smelled faintly of soap. In the woman I used to be. I whispered to no one, "I'm not gone, just misplaced." The next morning I sat in the motel room eating half of a cold sandwich I'd wrapped in foil 2 days earlier. The coffee was bitter. It wasn't even mine. The front desk girl gave it to me with a look that said she felt sorry for me, even though she didn't know my name. Outside, cars rushed by, unaware of the woman sitting behind the stained window, counting the years she'd given away for free. I thought about calling someone, my sister. She was in Florida and barely called back. My church friend, Gloria? I didn't want pity, not from anyone. So I just sat there, biting into dry bread, chewing my grief. What hurt more than the insult was the silence after. Chad didn't ask where I'd go. He didn't offer me a cushion for the fall. "No, I'm sorry, Mom. No, we'll talk soon." Just the sound of that door closing behind me. That click still echoed louder than any scream could have. I pressed the envelope from my husband to my chest. I hadn't opened it since the day he passed. He told me to save it for when I needed strength. I guess today counted. Before I could unfold it, I saw my reflection in the dark TV screen. My hair was thinner. My eyes were rimmed with sleep I hadn't earned. I didn't look like a woman who'd raised a millionaire. I looked like a woman who was forgotten. But I wasn't done yet. I finally opened the letter that evening. The motel room smelled of must and bleach, but the paper inside that envelope smelled like home, like the cedar drawers of our bedroom dresser, like the life we once had when love was enough. My husband's handwriting was shaky, but still him, still strong, still careful. "Nancy, if you're reading this, something's gone wrong, and I hate that I'm not there to hold your hand. But if there's one thing I know, it's this. You are stronger than anything they can do to you. This house, this family, it lived because of your heart. If they forget that, it's not you who lost. Keep the faith. Use the key. I stared at that last line. Use the key. What key? The house key? The one now useless in my coat pocket? Then I remembered. The tiny key he once gave me, hidden in the back of his toolbox. He told me it was for a rainy day. I never asked more. Maybe I was too scared to. Or maybe I trusted him so deeply that I believed I'd never need it. My fingers searched my purse like they had memory of their own. And there it was, wrapped in a bit of red cloth, warm from the heat of my palm. A new thought whispered. He left me more than memories. The key was real, and now it was waiting to be used. The key was small, brass, smooth from years of sitting untouched, but it held weight, not just in metal, but in meaning. I held it like it might dissolve if I breathed too hard. That night I didn't sleep. I lay on top of the stiff motel blanket, the key resting on my chest like a pendant. I remembered how my husband once told me, always protect what matters, even when people forget its value. By morning, I knew where to go. Back in our neighborhood, just 2 streets over from the house Chad now claimed as his own, there was a storage unit we'd rented once during renovations. Unit 117. I hadn't thought of it in years. It was under his name, but I remembered the place. I walked there in a sweater too thin for the October air. The clerk barely looked up when I gave the number, but the lock clicked open with that small brass key inside. It smelled like dust and old secrets. There was a trunk in the back, navy blue, chipped on the corners, the one we'd taken on our honeymoon. I hadn't seen it since 1986. My hands trembled as I opened it. Letters, legal papers, photos Chad had probably forgotten existed. But what made me gasp wasn't the past. It was the present. Deeds, originals, bank statements, life insurance papers. My name on them, not Chad's. My husband hadn't left me empty. He had left me prepared. I sat on the cold concrete floor of the storage unit, surrounded by proof that I wasn't invisible. My name, Nancy Louise Redford, was printed in bold ink on document after document. My hands trembled as I turned the pages. The house deed, the life insurance payout, a secondary bank account with my name as the sole beneficiary. He had hidden it all here, away from greed, away from manipulation. He had known. Not everything, of course, but enough to suspect that one day our son might lose his way. One letter, dated 5 months before his heart attack, said, "If Chad ever turns his back on you, this file will remind you who you are. You built this house, Nancy. You raised him. You gave everything. He can take the roof, but he can't take your worth." I cried. But it wasn't the bitter, aching sob I'd let out in the motel bathroom 2 nights ago. This time, it was quiet, deep, the kind that shakes loose something that's been stuck inside for too long, like a pebble lodged in the heart. He saw me. Even in death, my husband had seen me. I packed the documents back into the trunk. I didn't know exactly what I would do yet, but I no longer felt powerless. I had more than a key. I had the truth, and the truth was patient. It would wait until the right moment to rise. 3 days later, I found myself walking toward the old church on Maple Avenue, not for mass, just for stillness. The church had always been a place where the noise inside me could quiet down, and I needed that now. Not answers, just a moment to breathe. As I sat on the wooden bench by the garden wall, a woman approached. Mid-60s, modest coat, a cane in her right hand. Her name was Miriam. We'd sung together in choir once, years ago. She looked at me, paused, then asked gently, "Nancy, you okay?" It was the first time anyone had asked me that since I left my home. Not with judgment, not with curiosity, just care. I nodded, but my eyes welled up without permission. Miriam didn't pry. She just sat beside me. She pulled out a small thermos and poured tea into a plastic lid, handing it to me like it was holy. "You always gave more than you had," she said after a while, eyes fixed on the trees. "I used to wonder if your family ever really saw that." I held the warm cup and looked at her. "They didn't," I whispered, then softer. "But my husband did. He left me something." Miriam didn't ask what. She just nodded. "Then you're not alone. Sometimes justice starts small, in a cup of tea, in being seen, in remembering that your story isn't over, not because of what they did, but because of who you still are." Back at the motel that afternoon, I turned on my old flip phone, the kind Chad always mocked me for keeping. I had a few voicemails, mostly from the pharmacy or church announcements, but one caught my attention. It wasn't left for me. It was Tara, Chad's wife. She hadn't realized she dialed my number. Her voice came through muffled at first, then clearer, sharp, cold, impatient. He still thinks the money's going to last forever, and now he's talking about selling the land. I told him to get rid of her. That old woman was in the way. What does she even need a house for at her age? I stood still, my hand clenched around the phone. The way she said it. Get rid of her. Like I was clutter. Like I was some moldy box left in a garage. And Chad? He had listened. All the hugs, all the bedtime stories, all the nights I stayed up when he had fevers, all of it, erased by the promise of wealth and a wife who saw me as disposable. But the voicemail, accidental as it was, did something no lawyer could. It gave me clarity. This wasn't just betrayal, it was manipulation. My son had become a puppet, but Tara, she held the strings, and maybe it was time someone pulled them back. The next morning, I dressed in the same navy coat I'd worn to Chad's graduation. The hem was frayed, the buttons loose, but it still carried something, the memory of pride, of love before it soured. I didn't go to the house to plead. I went to look, not at what was taken, but at what was still mine in memory. I stood across the street, behind a neighbor's fence. The leaves had begun to fall, amber and gold. My rose bush was still blooming in the front yard, untouched. I planted it the year Chad turned 10. Tara opened the front door to pick up a package. She didn't see me. She laughed into her phone and disappeared back inside, like nothing had ever lived in those walls before her. But I saw everything. The shutters I painted, the mailbox my husband built with his bare hands, the crack in the driveway Chad tripped over when he was learning to ride his bike. They could repaint the walls, replace the furniture, strip the photos from the hallway, but they couldn't rewrite the history. That house had my fingerprints in its foundation. A car slowed behind me. It was Mr. Bell from 2 doors down. He leaned out the window, puzzled. "Nancy? You okay?" I smiled faintly. "Just visiting a memory." He frowned. "Heard some talk about what your son did. Folks aren't happy." That surprised me. I hadn't expected anyone to notice, but maybe someone always does. That afternoon, I walked to the post office with trembling fingers and a manila envelope in my bag. Inside were copies of the documents I'd found in the storage unit, the ones with my name, my rights, my husband's signature. But that wasn't what I planned to send. I addressed the envelope to my motel room. I needed proof, not just legal but emotional. A reminder that I still had something solid in my hands, that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined a lifetime of love and labor. The clerk looked at me curiously when I handed it over. "To yourself?" she asked, tilting her head. I nodded. Sometimes you need to hear the truth from someone who lived it. She didn't ask more, just stamped it and gave me the receipt. That slip of paper felt heavier than it should have, like a stone anchoring me back into the world. Outside, I sat on the bench near the bus stop and looked up at the sky. Gray, motionless. I let the silence wrap around me. I wasn't ready to fight yet, but I was no longer lost. There's a power in naming what was taken, in saying, "This was mine." This was real. I mattered. And now, piece by piece, I was beginning to take it back. 2 days later, I met Gloria at the little cafe near the laundromat. We hadn't seen each other in months, not since before the funeral. She wore her usual lavender scarf and had a way of smiling that made you feel like you'd been missed, not pitied. When I slid into the booth across from her, she didn't ask the obvious questions. She just reached across the table and held my hand for a moment. "I heard," she said softly. "Not all of it, but enough." My throat tightened. I stared at the chipped sugar jar between us. "He said it's his house now," I whispered. "Told me to leave." Gloria nodded, no shock in her eyes. "Just sadness. You gave him everything." "I know. And he thinks that gives him permission to forget." I looked up. "What do you do with that kind of pain?" She poured sugar into her tea. "You carry it, but you also name it. You say it out loud so it doesn't own you anymore." I reached into my bag and handed her a photocopy of the deed. "My name's still on everything." "My husband, he knew." Gloria smiled, eyes wet but proud. "Then it's not over, Nancy." I exhaled, a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for weeks. "No," I said, "it's not. Sometimes dignity doesn't return with thunder. It sits across from you in a quiet cafe and simply reminds you who you are. The next time I saw Tara was by accident, or maybe by fate. I'd gone to pick up a prescription at the pharmacy, same one I'd been going to for over 20 years. She walked in with her sunglasses on and her chin tilted high, as if she was walking a runway instead of pushing a shopping cart. She spotted me before I could turn away. "Well," she said, loud enough for the cashier and 2 customers to hear, "look what the cat dragged in." I didn't speak. She stepped closer. "Still lurking around town like some sad little ghost?" That word stung more than I expected. Ghost. She wanted me erased, not just from the house, but from memory, from Chad's world, from everything I'd built with my own hands. I straightened my spine. "You should be careful, Tara," I said quietly. "Sometimes ghosts come back with stories to tell." She flinched, just barely, then rolled her eyes. "You're nothing without that house, without him." I smiled, a small one. "That's where you're wrong. I left without my prescription. I didn't want it anymore, but I walked out taller than I came in. She didn't know what I had. Not yet. The key, the documents, the truth on paper and voices on voicemail. She thought she'd won, but ghosts don't disappear. They linger. And sometimes they return, not to haunt, but to reclaim what was sacred. That night back at the motel, I pulled my Bible from the drawer. It was the same one I'd had since Chad was born. Pages yellowed, corners soft from years of prayer and worry. I'd always kept a photo tucked inside, the 3 of us at the lake, the summer Chad turned 9. I hadn't looked at it in years. My thumb traced the edges before I opened it. There we were, me in a wide straw hat, my husband holding the fishing rod, and Chad between us, grinning with 2 front teeth missing. My arms were wrapped around him. We looked happy. We were happy. But what struck me now wasn't the smiles. It was the way I was looking at Chad in that photo. Like he was the whole world, like I had nothing else to give, but still gave more. Tears fell before I could stop them. I whispered into the quiet, "Where did you go, my boy?" I knew the answer, of course. He went where so many do when money enters the room, away from memory, away from humility. He followed the voice that promised more, forgetting the one that stayed up nights when he had nightmares. But I wasn't here to beg for his love back. I was here to remember mine. And that photo, it wasn't proof of what I lost. It was a reminder of what I still carried. A mother's love doesn't disappear. It just waits, buried in the pages of a worn Bible, ready to rise. The next morning, I called the number scribbled on one of the old documents from the trunk. I hadn't noticed it at first. Tucked in the corner of a letter, written in my husband's careful hand. For Nancy. If things go wrong, call Ben. Ben Peterson. He'd been our lawyer once, years ago, when we were setting up the will and the house deed. A quiet man with silver hair and a voice like slow thunder. I didn't even know if he was still practicing, but he answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Redford," he said, his voice surprised. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." That stopped me. "You expected me. Your husband left instructions, private ones. Told me not to act unless you came forward yourself." I felt the room tilt slightly. He didn't trust Chad, did he? There was a pause. Then gently, "He trusted you." Ben invited me to his office that afternoon. The building hadn't changed. Same creaky elevator, same framed photo of his dog by the reception desk. He welcomed me like an old friend and led me to the back room. He laid out the papers one by one. "You're still the co-owner of the house, Nancy. Chad can't sell it without your signature." My hands trembled as I picked up the folder. "And the bank account?" I asked. Ben nodded. "Still in your name, untouched, with interest." It wasn't about the money. It was about being seen, respected, counted. And now, for the first time in weeks, I was. That evening, back at the motel, I got another voicemail, this time from Chad himself. His voice was forced, rehearsed, too polite. "Hey, Mom. Just checking in. Hope you're, doing okay. Listen, Tara and I were thinking of putting the house on the market. Great timing with the market right now. We'll, work something out for you. Call me. Work something out. Like a deal, like a contract with a stranger. Not come home, not I'm sorry. Just another transaction. Like I was now a line item in his portfolio. But what he didn't know is that I already knew everything. The voicemail Tara left, the documents in the trunk, the legal truth Ben had confirmed just hours earlier. They thought I had nothing. That's why they move so quickly. Greed doesn't wait. It pounces when it smells weakness. But I wasn't weak. I forwarded Tara's voicemail to Ben. When I called him, I could hear the shift in his voice. "That recording is gold," he said. "Shows intent, malice. It's more than enough if this goes to court." Court. I hadn't even thought about that. I wasn't ready for a courtroom, a fight, a spectacle. But justice doesn't always knock politely. Sometimes it waits for you to stop crying, then places the sword in your hand. And standing in that dim motel room, with my back straight and the papers in my purse, I realized maybe I didn't want revenge. Maybe I just wanted to be heard. A few days later, I returned to the house, not to confront, not to beg, but to see. I walked around the block slowly, like someone remembering a dream. It was early morning, and the street was quiet, mist still rising from the grass. I stopped at the edge of the yard, by the old garden bed I planted years ago, the one no one else ever touched. It was overgrown now, but the lavender still bloomed, stubborn, resilient, the kind of plant that survives even when forgotten. I crouched down, brushing my fingers over the cracked garden marker that still read, Nancy's Corner. They hadn't even bothered to pull it out. Inside the house I saw movement. A curtain shifted, a shadow passed. Tara, probably, watching me like I was the ghost she'd tried to exorcise. But I wasn't haunting. I was remembering. This patch of earth had known my hands. These bricks had echoed my laughter. That porch. I'd sat there with iced tea, waiting for Chad to come home from school. Every inch of this place was soaked in my love, even if they painted over it. Suddenly the front door opened. Chad stepped out. He saw me. Froze. We locked eyes. Neither of us spoke. I simply stood, brushed the dirt from my palms, and gave him a look he hadn't seen since he was a child. The kind that said, "I'm not afraid of you." Then I turned and walked away. Back at the motel, a white envelope was waiting in my mailbox. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Chad. I sat on the edge of the bed before opening it. my heart thudding like an old drum. Part of me hoped for an apology, not elaborate, just a line that said he still remembered who I was. But that's not what he wrote. "Mom, I don't know why you're making this harder than it needs to be. You always said you wanted me to have a better life. I'm just trying to protect that, for me and Tara. The house was never really yours alone. Dad wanted me to have it. You're just holding on because you're bitter. Please stop. Chad, no, I miss you. No, are you okay? Just control disguised as concern." I folded the letter and slid it into the drawer with the motel Bible. This wasn't confusion on his part. It was belief. The kind that takes root slowly, watered by years of someone whispering in his ear. Tara didn't build that lie alone, but she fed it well. Still, something in me went quiet, not broken, just done waiting. My husband had left me a gift, not just in legal terms, but in faith. He knew I'd be pushed. He knew I'd be blamed, but he also knew I wouldn't bend forever. Chad's letter didn't hurt me, it freed me. 2 weeks later, we sat in Ben's office, all three of us, Chad, Tara, and me. I had asked Ben to arrange the meeting formally with notice and documentation. No yelling, no drama, just truth, laid bare under fluorescent lights and thick file folders. Chad didn't look at me when he walked in. Tara wore sunglasses indoors, legs crossed, tapping her nails on the armrest like she had better things to do. Ben sat at the head of the table, calm and precise. "I've reviewed the documents," he began. "Nancy retains equal ownership of the house. Legally, she cannot be removed. Furthermore," he held up the printed voicemail Tara had accidentally left. "This message suggests deliberate intent to defraud and emotionally manipulate." Tara's tapping stopped. Chad finally looked at me, not with regret, not yet, just surprise, like he'd never imagined I'd fight back. "You went behind our backs?" he said quietly. "No," I replied, my voice steady. I walked forward. "You left me behind." Ben continued laying out options. They could agree to a settlement, return the house to my name, avoid public legal action. Tara opened her mouth, but Chad raised his hand to stop her. He was sweating, and I sat in stillness, not out of revenge, but dignity. This wasn't a courtroom, it was a reckoning, and for the first time in years, my silence held more power than their plans. 2 days after that meeting, Ben called again. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice slower than usual. "Your husband added an amendment to the will, sealed, not to be opened unless there was a dispute." I closed my eyes. "There is." Ben nodded. "Then you need to be here tomorrow. So does Chad." The room was quiet the next morning. Just the three of us again. The file sat on the table like a stone. Ben opened it with the care of someone lifting sacred ground. He read aloud. "If my wife Nancy is ever denied her home, her dignity, or her peace by our son or his spouse, the ownership of the house is to be transferred entirely to her. No contest. If she has been dishonored, then let her name restore what was broken." Tara made a sound like she'd swallowed something sour. Chad stood up. "What is this?" Ben looked at him plainly. "It's his word, sealed, signed, legally binding." Chad's face turned pale. He looked at me, not with anger this time, but something smaller. Fear, shame. "You didn't know?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer, just stared at the floor like a boy caught in a lie. For a moment I felt a pang, not of vengeance, but of memory, of who he used to be, the child in the photograph, the boy who once ran into my arms. But he wasn't that boy anymore, and I was no longer the woman he could silence. The meeting ended without a single handshake. Chad left first, shoulders hunched, keys jangling in his hand, no goodbye. Tara followed behind, sunglasses still on, jaw clenched like she could hold on to control if she bit down hard enough. I stayed. Ben offered me tea, and I accepted. We sat in his quiet office, the light slanting through the blinds in golden stripes. The storm had passed, but its echo still lived in my bones. I never wanted to fight him, I said softly. Ben nodded. I know. I just wanted to be respected, not pushed aside like a forgotten coat. He looked at me with something close to admiration. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't seek revenge. You just brought the truth. And that was it. No courtroom speech, no dramatic gesture, just truth, quiet and sharp, slicing through the lies they'd built. When I got back to the motel, I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the deed in my lap. It felt heavier than paper should, because it carried years of silence, sacrifice, and surrender I had finally taken back. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just closed my eyes and breathed. Justice had arrived, not like lightning, but like dawn. Quiet, certain, undeniable. And in that stillness, I realized something. I hadn't lost my son. He had lost himself. And now, it was up to him to find his way back. It took me a week before I gathered the courage to return, truly return, to the house. The papers were signed. The deed was mine, legally, completely. But my heart still trembled at the thought of stepping over that threshold. I went early. The morning light was soft, and the air had that crisp bite that warned of winter. I carried no suitcase, no triumph, just the key. The old one worn smooth from decades of use, the one I never stopped carrying, even when I was no longer welcome. I slid it into the lock. It turned without resistance. The door creaked open and I stepped inside. Everything was quiet. Chad and Tara had already moved out, fast, probably in shame, maybe in fury. But what they left behind was silence, and a scent I couldn't name. Something bitter, something gone. The kitchen was cleaner than I expected, but cold. My apron hook still hung behind the pantry door. Empty. I walked through the rooms slowly, like touching a ghost. The living room, the hallway, the photograph hooks still nailed to the wall, stripped bare. And then, the back porch. I opened the door and stood there, watching the sun stretch across the yard. The rose bush had one bloom left, pale and shivering but alive. And just like that, I whispered, I'm home, not as a guest, not as a burden, as a woman who had been erased and wrote herself back into the story. Later that day, I walked to the edge of the yard where the mailbox stood. It was rusted now, its paint peeling, the red flag hanging by a loose screw. My husband built it with Chad when he was just a boy. I remember them both laughing, hammering nails, crooked and proud. When I opened it, there was only one piece of mail inside. A catalog, addressed to current resident. It made me smile, bitter and soft. I walked back to the porch, catalog in hand, and sat on the old swing. It creaked under my weight, like it remembered every conversation I ever had there. Every late night talk, every cup of tea, every quiet prayer whispered into the dark. I thought of all the women who never got this far. The ones thrown out of their homes without justice. The ones who stayed quiet for the sake of family. The ones who believed that love alone would protect them from cruelty. I had been one of them. But now I had my name back, not just on paper, but on the land, on the walls, on the silence itself. My name was in the mailbox again, in the deeds, in the ground. Chad hadn't taken it from me. He couldn't. Because what's built with love, real love, never leaves. It waits, like lavender under frost. And when spring returns, it blooms again. It was a Thursday evening when I saw headlights sweep across the driveway. I watched from the window, no curtain pulled, no fear in my chest. I had nothing left to hide. Chad stepped out of the car alone. He didn't knock right away. He stood there, hands in his pockets, like a boy waiting to be scolded. I opened the door before he could lift his hand. "Hi, Mom," he said. It had been weeks since I'd heard those words. I didn't smile. I didn't open my arms. I just stepped aside. He walked in slowly, looking around like a stranger. His eyes caught the old family photo I'd rehung in the hallway, the one he'd taken down. His face tightened when he saw it back in its place. "I came to talk," he said. I nodded, waiting. He sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I used to lay out his spelling tests and peanut butter sandwiches. Now he looked like a man who'd misplaced something he couldn't name. "I don't know why I let it get this far," he said, voice low. "Tara, she—" "No," I interrupted gently. "Don't give her all the weight. You chose to." He looked at his hands, ashamed. "I was angry," he whispered. "But you didn't deserve that." I sat across from him, quiet. "You hurt me, Chad," I said softly, "but I'm still here. Sometimes dignity doesn't scream. It waits until the guilty learn to sit with silence." We sat in that kitchen for over an hour. No lawyers, no papers, just tea boiling in the kettle and the sound of the fridge humming in the corner. I made him a sandwich, not out of obligation, but habit. The same way I used to when he came home late from baseball practice. Peanut butter and banana sliced diagonally. He didn't ask for it, but when I placed it in front of him, he looked like he might cry. "I don't know how to fix it," he said, chewing slowly. I leaned against the counter, arms folded. "Fixing isn't the first step. Seeing is." He nodded, eyes rimmed red. "I've been thinking about Dad," he added quietly. "He warned me in his own way." I didn't listen. "No," I said, "you didn't." "But you came back anyway. You stayed." "Why?" I took a breath, the kind that carries decades. "Because I love you," I said. "But I love myself now too, and I won't disappear for anyone again." He nodded. No arguments, just silence, the kind that accepts truth, even when it stings. I didn't forgive him completely that night. Wounds like this don't close in a single evening, but something shifted, a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. A small one, but enough to let light in. Sometimes the first step toward healing is a sandwich made by the very hands you once pushed away. Before Chad left that night, he asked if he could take one last box from the garage. I followed him outside, the porch light casting a soft halo over us both. It was the same light I used to leave on when he stayed out too late as a teenager. He found the box quickly, the one with his old yearbooks, childhood drawings, and a broken trophy from 8th grade soccer. As he lifted it into his arms, I spoke, not to stop him, but to remind him. "Those memories don't excuse what you did, Chad," I said, "but they still belong to both of us." He paused at the doorway. "I know, I miss when it was simpler." I nodded. "So do I. But love isn't simple, it's a daily choice. And you stopped choosing me." His head dropped slightly. "I'm sorry, Mom." This time I heard it, not as a habit, but as a truth. He carried the box to the car, placed it gently in the back seat, then turned to face me one last time. "Do you think there's still a way back?" he asked. I didn't answer with words. I reached behind me, unhooked the apron still hanging in the kitchen doorway, and handed it to him, not as a gift, but as a memory. Of warmth, of effort, of all that was given freely. "Start here," I said. He held it like it mattered, and for the first time in a long while, it did. A week later, I heard a knock at the front door, not hurried, not demanding, just present. When I opened it, I found Miriam, the woman from the church bench, holding a small basket covered in a linen towel. Warm bread. I could smell it before she spoke. "I figured it's time someone welcomed you home," she said. I laughed softly and stepped aside to let her in. She walked through the house slowly, taking it in like a museum of emotions. "It's strange," she said, touching the windowsill, "how a place can look the same and yet feel completely different." "Because now it breathes again," I said. "Now it's mine." We sat at the kitchen table, same spot where I'd faced Chad, same place I'd once sat in silence after being cast out. Over buttered bread and quiet sips of tea, Miriam finally asked, "What changed?" I placed my hand on the table, firm, sure. "I did." She smiled. "You always had that strength." You just buried it under years of being needed. We spoke for hours about forgiveness, about boundaries, about how sometimes peace doesn't come from fixing what's broken, but from finally walking around it, choosing something new. As she left, Miriam turned on the porch and looked back. Your story, she said, will help someone else. Maybe more than you know. And I believed her. Because every woman who's been erased deserves a chapter where she writes herself back in bold. With winter approaching, I spent my afternoons tending the garden. It had been neglected for months. Soil dry, leaves brittle, weeds clinging like forgotten arguments. But beneath it all, the roots still breathed, just like me. I pulled back dead stems and whispered to the dirt as I worked, the way I used to when Chad was small. He used to sit on the porch steps with a plastic shovel, pretending to help. I could still hear his laughter echo faintly under the rustle of wind. The lavender had survived, of course, resilient as ever. But something new was growing along the fence. A wild vine, thin and green, curling upward like it believed in sunlight. I didn't rip it out. Let it stay, I thought. Let something unexpected take root here. As I stood and wiped the soil from my palms, I felt something settle inside me. Not revenge, not triumph, but restoration. Like a puzzle piece clicking into place. I wasn't just healing, I was blooming again in slow, stubborn silence. That evening, I lit a single candle on the windowsill. Not for ceremony, just because the light felt like a promise to myself. A promise that I would no longer shrink to fit into anyone's comfort. I had weathered the frost. And now, the garden and I would grow on our own terms. A few days later, I noticed something unusual. Neighbors slowing down as they walked past the house. Lingering glances, gentle waves. Some of them I hadn't seen in years. Others I'd only known through brief hellos over garden fences. Mrs. Lambert from across the street brought over a pie. I heard what happened, she said, eyes kind but cautious. It's good to see you back. She didn't ask for details. She didn't need to. The truth has a way of spreading quietly, through shared glances, hushed voices, and the invisible network of a town that remembers who built what and who threw it away. I always thought it was strange, she continued, how quick they were to move in, like they were waiting. I nodded, brushing a crumb from the corner of my mouth. They were. She hesitated. I hope he finds his way back. But I'm glad you did first. That night I stood on the porch and watched as the house lights on the block flickered on one by one. This street had seen my beginning, my first days as a wife, a mother, a woman with hope. It had also witnessed my undoing, and now it was witnessing my return. Not loud, not grand, just steady, whole. Sometimes justice isn't the headline. It's a quiet nod from someone who sees you, really sees you, and knows you were right to come home. A week later, a delivery truck pulled up to the curb. No knock. Just the sound of cardboard landing gently against the front door. When I opened it, there it was. The same box Chad had taken from the garage. The one filled with his yearbooks, drawings, and that crooked little trophy. On top of it, a note in his handwriting. I realized these aren't just mine. They belong to the woman who made those memories matter. I'm sorry. See, I sat on the living room floor, box open, knees folded beneath me. I pulled out one drawing, a crayon sketch of me in the kitchen labeled, "My mom, the best cook." My eyes welled, but the tears didn't fall. Because this time, I didn't feel erased. I felt remembered. He was trying in his own slow way. Trying to return pieces of what he'd taken, not just physically, but emotionally. Forgiveness doesn't wear a suit or arrive with apologies rehearsed. Sometimes it shows up in a cardboard box, quietly, nervously, hoping to be received. I didn't call him. I didn't rush to say, "It's okay." It wasn't yet. But I placed the drawing on the mantel. Not as decoration, but as a bookmark, a place in the story where something old began to soften. He had sent it back, and this time, I kept it. One morning, I sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a notebook I hadn't opened in years. The pages were yellowed at the edges, the lines faint, but they were mine. Filled with little recipes, garden notes, and the occasional letter I never sent. I picked up a pen and began writing again. Not to Chad, not to anyone else, to myself. Nancy, you've come through the fire. You've been unseen, unheard, and called a burden. But you are still here, not for approval, not for apology, but for peace. The words flowed like breath after too long underwater. For years, my voice had only existed in whispers. Under other people's needs, hidden behind silence, I mistook for strength. But now, I could hear myself again, clear, steady. I wrote for an hour. I didn't stop to edit or explain. I just let the truth fall out of me like petals finally released from a too tight bud. When I finished, I folded the page and placed it in the drawer beneath the cutlery, where things you want to find always seem to hide. I didn't need the world to read it. I just needed to know it existed. My story, in my words, without shame. Sometimes the first sound of healing isn't a cheer. It's the quiet scratch of a pen in the hands of a woman reclaiming her name. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Chad came again. No call, no warning, just the sound of his car pulling slowly into the driveway. Not like someone returning home, but like someone approaching a memory they're afraid to wake. I watched from the window, then met him at the door. He didn't bring Tara. That alone told me everything. He held a small photo album in his hand, one I hadn't seen in years. The red leather cover worn thin from time and fingers flipping through the pages during happier days. I found this in a box, he said. Thought, maybe you should have it. I didn't move to take it, not right away. He stood in the doorway, unsure, until I nodded toward the living room. We sat in silence, turning pages. There we were, birthdays, vacations, muddy shoes, missing teeth, Christmases with too much tinsel. Each photo a stitch in a life we once shared. Halfway through, he cleared his throat. She's gone, he said. Tara, she left. I didn't react. She said I was too stuck in the past, that I kept looking backward. I looked at him, really looked. And were you? I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, but maybe. That's where I left the part of me that still had a heart. The album sat open between us. Not a prop, a witness. I placed my hand on the photo of us at the lake. And for once, we just sat in the past, not to stay, but to remember. Later that evening, after Chad left, I sat in the stillness of my living room. The photo album rested on my lap, but I wasn't looking at it anymore. My phone sat beside me. Old, scratched, full of messages I hadn't deleted. One in particular. Tara's voice, sharp and dismissive. Get rid of her. That old woman was in the way. I'd listened to it dozens of times before. At first it made my blood boil. Then it made me ache. But now, as I pressed play one last time, it didn't stir rage or tears. It simply reminded me of who I was no longer willing to be. Someone erased, someone dismissed, someone disposable. When it ended, I sat for a moment, staring out the window. Then I pressed delete, not to forget, but to free myself. I had kept it as armor, as proof, as ammunition, but now I had something stronger. The truth acknowledged, the dignity reclaimed, the home restored. I didn't need her voice in my pocket anymore. I had my own voice back, and in that small, quiet act, in that single tap of a button, I felt something close to sacred. Peace doesn't always come through justice served. Sometimes it comes when the anger no longer owns your breath. I rose, placed the photo album gently on the shelf, and turned off the lamp. The house exhaled with me. We were both learning how to rest again. The next morning, I left the house just after sunrise. Not to escape, not to chase anything, just to walk. The air was crisp, the sky still blushing with that soft early light. I passed the familiar fences, the mailboxes I once waved at with grocery bags in hand, the sidewalk cracks I used to warn Chad about when he was little. Everything was the same, and yet it wasn't, because I was different. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking in someone else's shadow. I wasn't hoping to be seen, heard, or needed. I wasn't a mother waiting for validation. I was a woman, full, whole, enough. At the corner, a little girl waved to me from a porch swing. I waved back, and she smiled like I was someone important, not just another face on the block. And maybe I was, because I had come through fire, not with ashes, but with roots, with a name still my own, with a story that could no longer be rewritten by anyone else's hand. I turned around and headed home, my home, the morning sun casting a soft golden light across the roof. And I didn't glance back once, because when you faced erasure and stood your ground, the view ahead always holds more promise than the one behind. The following weekend, I hosted a small gathering. Just a few neighbors, Gloria and Miriam, simple food, fresh lemonade, the kitchen filled with laughter that didn't ask permission, the kind that feels earned after years of silence. At one point, I stepped outside to catch my breath, and that's when I saw him. Chad, standing at the edge of the yard, his hands in his pockets. No car, no noise, just a man staring at a place he once claimed and then abandoned. Our eyes met. I walked to the porch and waited. No invitation, just space. Slowly, he walked up the steps. I wasn't sure if I should come, he said. I nodded. But you did. He looked around at the noise drifting from the kitchen, the garden beginning to bloom again, the old swing swaying gently in the breeze. You made this house alive again, he said. No, I replied. It was always alive. You just stopped hearing it. He stood there a moment, then reached for the doorknob, the same one I had gripped the day he told me to leave. He paused. I'd like to come in, he said, voice low. If that's okay. I looked at his hand, trembling. Then gently, I opened the door for him. The same door that once shut in my face now opened, not with fear, not with pride, but with grace. And this time, it was my choice to let him in. Chad stepped into the kitchen slowly, like someone entering a church. The voices quieted when they saw him. Gloria nodded politely. Miriam gave a small, knowing smile. The neighbors shifted in their chairs, sensing something sacred was unfolding. The kind of moment that doesn't need explaining. I pulled out a chair, the one he used to sit in as a boy when he couldn't reach the salt without standing. The one he abandoned when the house became a transaction instead of a home. He looked at it, then at me. Are you sure? I wouldn't offer it, I said, if I wasn't. He sat, not as the owner of anything, but as a son. He didn't speak much that day. He listened, watched, took in the way people looked at me now, with respect, with affection, not because I had won a battle, but because I had survived with my dignity intact. When the meal was done, he stayed behind while others trickled out. I miss who I used to be, he said quietly. I poured him another glass of tea. Then become him again. He looked at me, really looked. And for the first time in years, I saw the boy in his eyes. The boy who once brought me wildflowers and muddy shoes. The boy I never stopped loving, even when I couldn't recognize him. The chair had waited for him, but I had waited longer. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, and the dishes were drying in the rack, I stood in front of the pantry door, where my apron used to hang. It was back now. Chad had brought it with him on his first visit, folded neatly in a paper bag. He hadn't said a word when he handed it to me. He didn't need to. I reached out and touched the fabric, soft from years of wear, still carrying faint memories of flour, cinnamon, and long-ago meals filled with laughter. Then, without ceremony, I slipped it over my head. Not as a servant, not as someone desperate to be useful again, but as a woman reclaiming every thread of her story. Chad stood in the doorway, watching me quietly. "I remember you wearing that every morning," he said. "I wore it for love," I replied. "Not for thanks." He stepped forward slowly. "I didn't say thank you enough." I turned to face him, my eyes soft but unwavering. "No," I said, "you didn't." Silence stretched between us, not heavy, just real. And then he whispered, "Can I help you cook?" The boy who once stirred cake batter with sticky fingers was asking again, not from entitlement, but humility. I handed him a spoon, and just like that, the kitchen was whole again. Not because everything was fixed, but because we were finally starting from truth. The next morning, I stepped into the garden, apron still on, mug in hand. A chill clung to the air, the kind that warns you autumn's breath is turning sharper. The roses had begun to fade, leaves crisp at the edges. But one bloom remained, full, open, stubbornly alive. I knelt beside it, brushing away the fallen leaves that threatened to smother it. This was the same rose bush I had planted the year Chad broke his arm. The same year I taught him that healing takes time, and strength isn't always loud. Behind me, I heard the creak of the porch steps. "Chad." He said nothing, but I felt him watching as I stood, wiping my hands on the apron. "Still blooms," I said, pointing to the flower, "even after being ignored." He stepped forward, voice quiet. "Like you." I didn't reply. Didn't need to. We stood there together, mother and son side by side, not as enemies, not even yet as friends, just two people looking at something that survived despite everything. He turned to me, eyes wet. "How do you forgive someone who doesn't deserve it?" I looked at the bloom. "You don't do it for them. You do it for the roots, because forgiveness, like roses, grows underground first, in the dark, in the quiet, in the part no one sees. And when it finally breaks through, it does so in full color." That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, I placed the old brass key, the one from the storage unit, the one that changed everything, on a small hook by the front door. I'd kept it in my purse for weeks, clutched it like a weapon, a shield, a secret. But now, I no longer needed to hold it. It had done its job. The truth it unlocked had already taken root. Chad stood nearby, watching me. He knew what that key meant now, not just legally, but symbolically. It was proof of my faith, my strength, my husband's quiet trust in me. "Why keep it by the door?" he asked. I smiled gently. "So I never forget that I can open what's mine," I said, "even after they try to lock me out." He looked down, shame and something softer flickering across his face. "I wish I could take it back." "You can't," I said, "but you can keep walking forward." He nodded. We stood in silence. Not the silence of before, not the one filled with pain, distance, erasure. This was a different kind, a peace-filled quiet, the kind that comes when a wound begins to close, and you no longer flinch when someone touches the scar. The key clicked gently against the hook as the wind moved through the open window. It didn't have to unlock anything anymore. Its purpose had been fulfilled. That night, after Chad left, I turned on the old lamp in the living room, the one with the yellow shade and faded cord. My husband used to say it made the whole room feel like warm bread. I left it on, not for me, for him, in case he came back, not to stay, not to reclaim what wasn't his, but to visit, like a son remembering how to return home without ownership, without pride, without conditions. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt hollow. It held breath again. The floor creaked. The radiator hummed. The tea kettle whistled like an old friend. And I sat in my chair, blanket over my legs, book unopened in my lap. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, and the world softened into night. The lamp glowed steadily behind me, a sign that even after rejection, after betrayal, after silence and loss, something still burned. Not bitterness, not revenge, just light. A quiet reminder that some mothers never stop hoping, not because they're weak, but because their love is rooted in something deeper than pride. And if he ever knocked again, not for property but for presence, I'd answer, not as a victim, not as a doormat, but as a woman who stood tall in the ruins and built something new. The light stayed on all night. Morning came slow and gold. I stepped into the kitchen, poured myself a cup of tea, and opened the window. The breeze was gentle, the kind that carries no storm, only breath. The garden swayed quietly, the single rose still holding on. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt whole. No court victory, no dramatic apology, just me in my home, wrapped in the soft dignity of having never surrendered who I truly was. Even when they tried to rewrite me, the house was still mine, yes. But more than that, I was mine again. I sat at the table where so many moments had unfolded, love, betrayal, silence, small joy, and looked at the old photograph now returned to the wall. My husband, my son, me. Not perfect, but true. And I knew something now that I hadn't before. Respect isn't inherited. It's earned day by day. And if it's taken from you, you can take it back. With silence, with truth, with love that knows its own worth. Outside, the wind shifted. The rose dropped its final petal. Not in defeat, but in rest. Because even flowers know when they've done enough. So do mothers. So do women like me. So do women like you.